podcast dedicated to the music, movies, and culture of Generation X.
What is up, slackers, and welcome to a Halloween episode of the Stuck in the Middle podcast. I am your host, Jason Eck, and I'm literally recording this on Halloween. Sadly, I live on a street that's rather busy without any sidewalks, so we don't even get trick-or-treaters out here, which is kind of a bummer. It was always kind of fun, particularly when, our last house, it was on a semi-busy street without sidewalks, but there was a kind of a collection of cul-de-sacs, so we got activity, regular activity, and it's always fun to see the kids all dressed up in their costumes. And you tend to see the things that are popular at the time. I think you're always going to have a ton of, Harry Potters, but then for a while it was the Rocket Raccoons and all the Marvel stuff, very, very popular. Then you have the kids who are a little bit older who want to be scary. That includes my oldest, who for the longest time only wanted scary costumes, to the point where he was really creepy a couple of times. I think my favorite costume of his was he couldn't decide what he wanted to be. It's like, I kind of want to be a cowboy, but kind of want to be a werewolf. So, of course, he's like, can I be a werewolf cowboy? We're like, absolutely you can be a werewolf cowboy. And he sure was. Cowboy hat, he's got his vest, he's got his flannels, got his jeans, he's got his boots, and did up the face with fur, whole thing. Awesome. Absolutely awesome costume. One year when my daughter was really little, she was a cupcake. My wife made a cupcake costume. Adorable. So they've gone through all these different phases. My youngest has never really been anything scary. He's always been kind of like fun stuff, silly stuff. My daughter, who's probably too old for this, but she and her best friend last year, I think one of them had a Jason mask, one had a Scream mask, and they basically went to her friend's neighborhood and terrorized the neighborhood with their fake knives and machetes and whatnot. And they would try to scare little kids. And then they got to actually scaring teenage boys as well, because when they really decide to be a little bit spooky, they can be. But I think I mentioned on here before that for the longest time, my family is a little bit fragmented at this point. And Halloween was kind of a big deal in my family's house. So every year, a big annual Halloween party. And, my wife Maggie and I, we had some great ones. One year, she was a spider and I was a fly. Like, we made this whole costume and she had me, trapped in a web. That was the year that we were engaged. So of course, spider catches the fly. One year, she was the bowler from Mystery Men, and I was one of the gentlemen from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. We both won that year. I mean, this is the whole thing. There were absolutely tons of prizes. I won one year for being Anakin Skywalker, but it was Anakin Skywalker on his deathbed. So it was like the Darth Vader costume, but without the helmet and a bald cap. And I had wires coming out of one of my hand because, of course, he gets his hand cut off. But Halloween always kind of a big treat for us. So as the kids are older and kind of doing all, different things, my daughter's off with her friend now, terrorizing the neighborhood, I'm sure. My younger one was with a bunch of his buddies. They went down to, his neighborhood, and kind of an affluent neighborhood. They're going to do great. I'm sure it's full-size bars. And my oldest basically spent this whole weekend at college just partying. He was, in fact, a cowboy. He's been a cowboy a number of times. I think, at heart, he has a very, let's just say, Western name. I don't really talk about my kids' names on the podcast. I'm sure sometime when I have them on, I'll do that, but I'll let them introduce themselves one of these days because I keep trying to get them on the pod. Kind of like, oh, Dad, you're old. We don't want to be on your show. But anyway, as I've done for the last few episodes, and this will be the last one for a while, I think. So let me explain. I wasn't firm on my topic for tonight. So I'm like, do I keep doing this kind of Halloween theme? I just, like I said, I enjoy it. It's part of my history, and certainly it had been my favorite holiday other than Christmas for the longest time. And this time of year, I binge a lot of horror movies. And I try to do ones that I haven't seen before. In particular, there has been somewhat of a renaissance in horror movies. Now, that's not the topic, but I'll explain. So the past 2 weekends, and really throughout the week too, which is not common for me, normally too busy during the week, but, just a quick aside, like our washer dryer went complete, we had to get, new ones and all that, but it's like so much more efficient now. So things are going more smoothly with like the washing and the drying and all that. So like, that's one thing. And like, we're headed into a different season as far as like lawn care and all those kind of things. So I've been able to like get on top of things the best that I can so that I can have some just actual relaxation time. And that's kind of been what I've been doing. I've been watching horror movies, which I can't watch with my wife because if it's not like Scream, she's not interested. She didn't even really want to hear me as I was kind of talking to her about what I planned on doing tonight. She's like, no. You don't need to tell me any more about that. I'm good. We're good. But, there's a number of horror auteurs right now that are doing some great stuff. So I haven't seen any of the T West stuff. Ty West. So that's like the stuff he's doing with Mia Goth, right? X and all those kind of things. Here they're fantastic. I haven't had a chance to watch them yet. I've mentioned on here, my oldest watched Hereditary, which now my daughter watched it this weekend with her boyfriend. She's like, I don't know. It wasn't really that scary. I kind of fell asleep and whatever. I'm like, you fell asleep? I hear it's terrifying. So that's Ari Aster. Really well received for things like that, Midsummer, etc. But I think for Jordan Peele. Jordan Peele does great stuff. I've only just watched Us a couple weekends ago. I mentioned that on the pod as well. But I think the guy right now, for my money, it's got to be James Wan. So of course he has diversified the things that he does. He's done a Fast and Furious movie. He's done Aquaman. He's doing the Aquaman sequel. So he's not shy of doing other genres, but he really broke onto the scene because he was the director and it was his first movie and co-screenwriter for Saw. So the Saw series, he has that whole universe under his belt. But then he also has, so he did the Insidious series, and then he has the Conjuring series. So basically he has a couple of horror franchises, all very, very different in tone and story. But he's really such a great director of not just getting you with the simple jump scares and all that, but really trying to create lore as well. So you do have this kind of interconnected universe. And I think that's really fascinating. And I found myself really becoming a fan of Patrick Wilson, who has been the lead in both Insidious 1, 2, and 5. He directed 5, Patrick Wilson did. And then the Conjuring series, playing Ed Warren, with Vera Farmiga as Lorraine Warren. Now, Ed and Lorraine Warren is kind of where we're headed in for our topic tonight. But in watching The Conjuring, it reminded me of some things. So I'm kind of going to mix together some of my own experiences, if you will, and both in horror and real life and film, and kind of how all these things kind of intersect and things that I've been fascinated by. So I've really wanted to delve much more into like the paranormal for certain episodes, because I think it's really interesting. And I think it's something that our generation in particular has really latched onto. And I think that is evident when you consider things like Ghost Hunters, the TV show. Those are Gen X guys. You know what I mean? And I think that many of us have been influenced by the, 70s, 80s, 90s horror movies, as well as I think, this is just my opinion, okay, that there is this longing for understanding or explanation of things that I think is just inherently Gen X as well, because we question everything. And I think we question things differently than both boomers and millennials do, because I think it's rooted in just a very different place, just for where our lives within American culture, or worldwide culture, really. Like this generation, I think has the same basic traits no matter where you are in the world. Anyone who is listening to this from abroad, by all means, when I give the information at the end of the show, feel free to shoot me an email. Say, hey, look, my experience of Gen X in, I don't know, Scotland or Italy, I'd love to know. India. I'm mentioning places where I'm always just blown away that people are listening to from those areas, unless, of course, they're just expats or they're using a VPN. Nevertheless, if you've read the topic right at the landing page for the podcast, it says New England is scary. And obviously, I live in Massachusetts. I've talked about that before, but I grew up in Connecticut. And you're talking about some of the oldest places in the United States, of course, as well as being areas that were populated by, Native Americans. And I do think there is a lot of stuff. So this is where I'll kind of go back and forth between interesting things about the movies and my own experience. So I believe the opening of The Conjuring 2 is a short segment where Ed and Lorraine Warren are investigating Amityville. So the Amityville horror, which is, Amityville, Long Island, New York. Now, when I was a kid, when that movie came out, I'd only seen bits and pieces. I've mentioned that, I got to see a lot of content that maybe I shouldn't have. I think that's a Gen X calling card, honestly. And it really freaked me out for a lot of reasons, right? It's a family story more than anything. It's a story about one family in tragedy and one family perhaps living in the aftermath of that tragedy. So for anyone who doesn't know, we'll just do a brief kind of recap here of Amityville. So on November 13th, 1974, Ronald DeFeo Jr. shot and killed 6 members of his family at 112 Ocean Avenue, a large Dutch colonial house situated in a suburban neighborhood in Amityville on the South Shore of Long Island. Excuse me. He was convicted of second-degree murder. Second degree? In November 1975, and sentenced to 6 terms of 25 years to life in prison. DeFeo died in prison March 2021. Now, in December of 1975, so a month after he was convicted, George and Kathy Lutz and their 3 children moved into the house. After 28 days, the Lutzes fled the house, claiming to have been terrorized by paranormal phenomena while living there. Now, of course, this ended up being investigated by Ed and Lorraine Warren. So a couple of things that kind of stand out here is that when the Lutz family moved in, much of the DeFeo family's furniture was still in the house, and it was actually included in the closing of the house for $400 additional to just have it furnished. A friend of George Lutz learned about the history of the house and insisted on having it blessed. So at the time, George, who was a non-practicing Methodist, had no experience, and Kathy was a non-practicing Catholic and explained the process. So George knew Catholic priest, Father Ray. He came over, carried out the house, a blessing, and moved on, right? So Father Mancuso, let's see. Oh, they changed the name for privacy reasons. Was a lawyer, judge of the Catholic court, and a psychotherapist who lived at the local Sacred Heart Rectory. He arrived to perform the blessing while George and Kathy were unpacking their belongings and went into the building to carry out the rites. When he flicked the first holy water and began to pray, he heard a masculine voice demand that he get out. When leaving the house, Father Mancuso did not mention this to George and Kathy. Okay, Father, really? Father Mancuso called George Lutz and advised him to stay out of the second floor room where he'd heard the voice, the former bedroom of Mark and John Matthew DeFeo, that Kathy had planned to use as a sewing room. But the call was cut short by static. Following his visit to the house, Father Mancuso allegedly developed a high fever and blisters on his hands, similar to stigmata. Now, anyone who doesn't know what a stigmata is, those are the bleeding from the head and the hands and the feet as a representation of Christ's crucifixion. So at first, George and Kathy experienced nothing, but talking about their experiences subsequently, they reported that it was as if they were each living in a different house. They tried to bless the house again. They experienced what turned out to be their final night in the house. The Lutzes declined to give a full account of the events, describing them as too frightening. Let's see, they went and stayed at Kathy's mother's house until they'd sorted out the problems. They claimed the phenomenon followed them there, with the final scene of Anson's book describing greenish-black slime coming up the staircase towards them. On January 14th, 1976, George and Kathy Lutz, with their 3 children and their dog Harry, left 112 Ocean Avenue, leaving all of their possessions behind. The next day, a mover arrived to remove the possessions, and he reported nothing. Right? So this whole thing, I think, has been trying to debunk it, trying to figure out what it was, because certainly Ronald DeFeo Jr., I believe in his defense, say that he had heard voices. Let's see. George and Kathy Lutz took a polygraph test and attested that the events of the book were mostly true. And the results said they did not lie. Various owners of the house since 1976 have publicly reported no problems while living there. James Cromartie bought the house in 1977, lived there with his wife Barbara for 10 years, and he commented, "Nothing weird ever happened except for people coming by because of the book and the movie." Okay, so that's kind of like the background there. So anyone who has seen the movie, The Amityville Horror, will know that, and even on the cover of the first edition of the book by Jay Anson, there are flies. Because on the second floor, so I forget what it's called, but in a Dutch colonial house, you have these certain like rounded windows in the front of the house. And these became infested with flies, seemingly from nowhere. And they wouldn't go away. And I forget exactly. It's been a long time since I've seen it. But that room in particular was considered kind of a hotbed of activity. So this is where we kind of mix in the real life with this literary stuff. So let's see. This movie came out in 77 when the movie came out. Let's see here. Let's double check this. The book came out in 77. The movie came out in 1979. Okay. So I was like 5 years old when it came out. I remember seeing it on TV or VHS. So we're looking at probably somewhere around 80, 81. So I'm like 6 or 7 years old. And it's pretty freaking scary, right? So fast forward a couple of years. We end up moving to this apartment. So it's a 2-family apartment. But because we knew the landlord, we were also getting the attic as an extension of our apartment. So basically, I had my own suite upstairs, which I think I've mentioned this on the podcast before. It sounds hella cool, except when you're like 9 and you're up in this attic. And there was this creepy like side, I wouldn't call it a closet, but it was used as a closet, and it had this like creepy mirror, and it was bought so our landlord had a relationship with my mom. Like we knew this guy, and it was these 2 little old Italian ladies. One lived upstairs, one lived downstairs. I believe that either they were sisters or sister-in-laws, and both of their husbands had passed. I believe in the house, because that's just how shit was back then, right? So, it's all of like some of their stuff that they had left behind that they just didn't care about, right? So this creepy ass mirror that's up there. And of course it's an attic. So it's got the, low ceilings, sloped on each side. And for whatever reason, and this was basically the entire time that we lived there, with no explanation, never found an explanation, a lot of theories. Nothing ever came of it. I always had flies in the window. Any time of year, always flies in the window. And that room I kept pretty Spartan. So it wasn't like super messy. We didn't have a lot anyway. It wasn't like there was like food or anything. And it was always just in this one window. Always. Always. And I don't remember always necessarily feeling uneasy, but when I did feel uneasy, it was very, very acute. So like many of these attics, in the walls were these little, additional doors, like additional storage area where you open up a little latch and it goes inside the wall, right? So there was this weird little room with this weird little mirror and flies all the time. And sometimes just really tremendous feelings of dread, and like many kids, the solution to that is to pull your blankets up over your head. Or this is when I began to just leave the TV on all night. Or I would listen to music, my headphones plugged into the boombox under the blankets. Because I couldn't get that image out of my head. Why do I have these flies? It must be because there's something here, right? So I can't remember a ton of other stuff, in particular that happened there. I did become a little bit of a firebug in that particular apartment. And my mom was definitely going through this phase of she thought she had psychic abilities. Now, some weird shit did happen in regards to that. For example, one time she didn't tell me. She just went and hid something of mine. Totally just hid something of mine. Right? And she has me come and sit down at the table. And she puts her hand on my head. I'm like, what are you doing? And she just looks deep into my eyes. And she goes, listen to my thoughts. It was like, what are you doing? And, okay. And it's like, just concentrate. If I don't know how to describe, having a picture. I forget what it was. I feel like it was like an action figure of mine or something. I want to say it was like Ultimate Warrior action figure or something. I think that's what it was. But a picture clear as day in my mind of where it was. And I'm like, she's like, go get that. And I just went right to it and got it. And I'm like, what did you just do? You know what I mean? So it was just weird shit like that in that house. I don't know. It was very strange. But having all of those flies in the window just reminded me of Amityville. So fast forward. Here we are, 2023. So I'm kind of rambling tonight, and that's okay. Because I have all these different thoughts that I was trying to coalesce into kind of like a cohesive narrative for tonight. But I realize it jumps all over the place a little bit. So part of watching the Conjuring movies, so now kind of tying that back in, at the beginning of the first Conjuring, I don't know if I looked away, because you know how sometimes you just, right at the very beginning, you're still getting settled. Oh, okay, there's my water, and, I got a little snack or whatever it is. And, kind of in the corner of my eye, I think I saw some words pop up on the screen, and I didn't really see what it said. And I don't know, normally I would kind of reverse it and say, okay, well, what's that? And I didn't. So I'm just watching, and they're going into their new home, right? This is the Perrin family, right? And kind of this big house, right? And a big porch along the front. And I'm just like, okay, look at, and they enter the house. And I was just like, whoa, I know this house, or a house very similar. I knew the entire layout of that house as they're walking through, because what are they going to do when you're doing a horror movie and you're setting the stage for a haunting? Is that they're going to go through each room. Oh, look, we have a parlor. Oh, look, we have a dining room. You know what I mean? And they do it. But the way the camera was, We went up the porch, and there was like this shot right down the middle of the house, a long hallway. It goes right down the middle, and a staircase immediately to your right and up and curves, to the top of the landing. And this long hallway down the middle. And I'm like, oh, there's a room off to the right immediately. That's going to have like a fireplace, whatever. And it's the exact layout. And on the other side, there's going to be like this parlor, and you go down the hallway and there's 2 doors to the parlor. And on the other side, there's going to be, a dining room. On the other side, there's going to be a door, and it's going to have like, go down to the basement. Spoiler, it does, but it wasn't initially. You keep going down the hallway, and there you have like the kitchen off the back. The only difference in this house and the one that I was familiar with was the house I was familiar with actually had a 3rd floor. So again, I might have mentioned this on the podcast, but my dad's sister, her husband, my uncle, his family has a family home. The family built the home somewhere in the early 1800s. Multiple generations of his family lived there. It was only used as a summer home because it really didn't have modern heating. The only thing it had for heating would be, fireplaces and like one very small boiler for hot water, basically. Well, one time I had the opportunity to be left alone there. So the adults were going to go out. They're going to have an adult, night to go have dinner, have some drinks, right? I'm like, I don't want to do that. And I was old enough where I stayed home alone, back home all the time. And I was going to watch Star Wars on TV, on this little black and white TV in the parlor. Now, behind me in the parlor was this huge, fireplace and a big baby grand piano. And I'm just watching, whatever. And, it starts to get dark. Now, bear in mind, the parlor that I'm in, the piano room, the music room, as they would call it, was also the location where my uncle's grandmother, my cousin's great-grandmother, my cousins weren't even born yet, I don't think, had spent her last days, basically home hospice, in this room. And I remember clearly the big bed, the adjustable bed like they have in the hospital. And she's hooked up to all the wires and tubes. And she died in that room. Now, she was just the most recent of many, many relatives who died there. So my aunt and uncle had this cute little cat, Tiffany. Yeah, I remember the name of the cat. Anyway, and Tiffany decides to lose her shit. Now, you know how cats are, right? They could be annoying, whatever. And well, this cat is like whipping about, like losing her mind. I'm like, what is going on? And like I said, it's 3 floors. And I just hear the house, everything about it. And I venture up to the 1st floor once, top of the landing, and the room that I was staying in is that you go around the banister, and it's a room in the far corner, and fairly small. It would have been specifically either for servants' quarters or for children. Small, single bed in there, not very big. And the light didn't go on, and I'm like, okay, fine, whatever. Cat is still losing her mind. Now, you have to understand that there's also a whole back stairway that goes back up and around the house. And we're talking like claw tooth bathtub. Like it had a toilet with like the string to pull down, like old school. And I don't know what it was, but something on the floor above me just thud. I was out of there. Now, they had told me, hey, the neighbors right up the street, they're like, I don't know, 3 houses down. This is like a gravel road, like dirt road, heads down to the, the water in Rhode Island. And I booked it, didn't look back. And I ran down there, I'm knocking on the door. And they're like, hey, Jason, what's going on? I'm like, yeah, can I stay here until they get back? And I literally stayed there and fell asleep on their couch. I feel that I was very, very close to the lady of the house. I forget her name. I did not leave her side. And like, they woke me up like, hey, buddy, what's going on? I'm like, oh boy, that fucking house. Same exact layout. And it turns out, so I pulled up on my phone. I'm like, where does this take place? Because I missed that opening credit, Rhode Island. And that house is Rhode Island. So yeah, a very, very real experience. Now, the only other time I really got freaked out there was for whenever my dad was with us. We slept on the third floor, right, the top floor. Remember, I was going up there and like he was downstairs. I was going to like change or something. Maybe I was putting on my bathing suit. And I go up there and for whatever reason, I open the closet and there's like some Halloween mask. And I don't think it was real. One of those freaking shrunken heads. I about leapt out of my body. Like, are you serious? I hate this place. Now, I also loved that place. And I think that's one of the things about places like this, right? They're fascinating. They're interesting, the history of it all. But there were definitely times where I would kind of get a sense of something. Absolutely a sense of something in that place. And certainly the cat did. The cat was out of her mind. And I believe that my grandmother, now she was prone to sometimes falling out of bed. Now you have to imagine, like she's in her 60s and like, she would fall out of bed there. I know a couple things happened to her in that house too. She's long past now for me to ask her her experiences, but no one, how do I put this? No one was surprised or judgmental or mocked me in the slightest for having booked it out of there. Let's put it that way. So now I live in Massachusetts. So I started to mention that, right? So New England in general. So I thought I'd take a moment because I think I might have mentioned, gosh, this is probably a year ago now, a horrible case of a young woman who was friends with my sister in high school by the name of Lindsay Clancy, who with postpartum depression murdered all three of her children and attempted to kill herself. And I had heard the story immediately. And when I saw that she had gone to, the same high school as my sister, I texted her, I'm like, do you know her? And she didn't really, the married name didn't, jump out of her head right away. But I definitely told this story on the podcast before. And she was just devastated because she had been, watching from afar, Facebook, Instagram, this woman, live her life. So it was interesting because tonight, when I was thinking about different topics, I've been listening to a few different podcasts and there is something in Massachusetts called the Bridgewater Triangle. Now, where this event that I just talked about with the Clancy family is in Duxbury, Massachusetts, which is further to the east of the Bridgewater Triangle, but it is well known for having a number of kind of events that have happened there. So within this one area, you have Freetown Fall River State Forest, which has been the site of various cult activity, animal sacrifices, ritualistic murderers. Now, some of these are reported. Some of these look as though they may have been gang-related, and then a significant number of suicides. You have Profile Rock, which is the supposed site of the Wampanoag historical figure known as Anawan, which, it's a rock that has, a face. You have Solitude Stone, an inscribed stone located near Forest Street in West Bridgewater, which was found near a missing person's body. Also known as the Suicide Stone, the rock was found with the inscription, "All ye who in future days walk by Nunkatesket stream, love not him who hummed his lay, cheerful to the parting beam, but the beauty of that he wooed." I don't know, I guess he hung himself. Bridgewater State University, where several buildings and rooms on campus are alleged to be haunted by ghosts and other paranormal phenomena. Taunton State Hospital. Some visitors have claimed they have had strange paranormal experiences in the hospital, including being touched and pulled. It's also claimed that the hospital was used by satanic cults in the 60s and 70s. And Hornbein School, the one-room schoolhouse, was built during the 1840s, remained active until 1937. The building is alleged to be haunted by former inhabitants. Now, some of the things that have been talked about or cited all within the Bridgewater Triangle. UFOs, particularly bright balls of light, unnatural animal sounds, whatever that means, right? Paranormal humanoids. There have been Bigfoot sightings, ghosts, poltergeists, and shadow people. Thunderbird sightings. Giant birds or pterodactyl-like flying creatures with wingspans up to 12 feet are claimed to have been seen there, including a report by a Norton police sergeant. Also neighboring Taunton and Easton, which, by the way, I have family in Easton. Cult activity, animal mutilations. Let's see. A cow in the middle of the woods was butchered there randomly. Native American curses, again, the Wampanoag people. And then we have the Pukwudgie and Algonquin folklore. They are little people, but they're dangerous tricksters. Okay, now that's the basis. Now, one of the other areas here, so let me see here. I want to make sure I have this correct, because maybe it's just outside this area here. Give me just a moment. I guess it is slightly outside the triangle. Oh, I guess it is. Hold on. Bristol County. Oh, yeah. This is accurate. Okay. So, Fall River, Massachusetts. Now, Fall River, Massachusetts is quite famous for a murder case. So this is where are you going with all this? So I mentioned the Lindsay Clancy thing, which then led me to Fall River, which then is leading me to Lizzie Borden. So anyone who knows, Lizzie Borden with an axe gave her mother 40 whacks. When he saw what she had done, gave her father 41, I believe is the nursery rhyme. Okay. So Lizzie Borden, one of the things that I'd wanted to do, but my schedule went too crazy and there just wasn't any way to make it happen, was I wanted to, tonight, Halloween, was to get a room at the Lizzie Borden house, which is rentable, and do a live podcast from there. I couldn't pull it off, but one of these days, I'm definitely going to do that. But you have Sarah Anthony Borden and Andrew Jackson Borden, the parents of Lizzie, who were both legitimately hacked to death with an axe. Now, it seems as though Lizzie, who was the most obvious suspect, had an alibi and had actually been exonerated. She was not charged and she did not go to prison. She was acquitted. And they said that 5 days before the trial's commencement, another axe murder occurred in Fall River. This time, the victim was Bertha Manchester, who was found hacked to death in her kitchen. But because the similarities were so similar, it was noted by jurors. And a Portuguese immigrant by the name of Jose Carrera del Meio was convicted of Manchester's murder, but was determined not to have been in the vicinity of Fall River at the time of the Borden murder. So, who's to say? But in listening to a podcast this evening, it turns out that was not the only murder in the Borden family. Because apparently there was a question that had been asked to Lizzie during her trial. By the way, Lizzie Borden took an axe, gave her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41. But there's a second verse. I didn't even know that. Okay. Andrew Borden now is dead. Lizzie hit him on the head. Up in heaven he will sing. On the gallows she will swing. She didn't. But they asked the question of whether there were any other murderers or murderous intentions in the Borden family. Now, the Borden family, apparently, if you go to the Oak Grove Cemetery, is jam-packed with Bordens. They're all over the place. A very well-known and reputable family in Fall River. So apparently her uncle, I want to say it's Langford? Let's see. So basically they all lived in essentially the same area. So it was, let's see, 2nd Street, right? 2nd Street in Fall River. And this lesser known situation, it's not showing up. Oh, I should have taken notes, but I was driving. I was so fascinated in listening to this. And I thought it was really amazing. Here it is. So, oh, wow. This article just came up with really cool archival stuff, which I cannot show you, of course. But here we have Eliza Darling Borden. When Lizzie Borden was on trial, it was imagined by some that perhaps madness ran in her family, given the grim story of Eliza Darling Borden. In 1848, Lizzie's great-uncle, Lodwick Borden, was married to Eliza, his second wife. The two lived also on 2nd Street, right next door to where Andrew, Abby, Lizzie, and Emma would later be. However, it's about 100 yards away. It's not exactly next door. Eliza and Lodwick had 3 children, Maria, Eliza Ann, and Holder, and this seemed to have left Eliza mentally disturbed. Most likely what we consider now to be postpartum depression. And that's where this whole thing, I think, starts to coalesce. So one day in May, Eliza decided the children had to die. She took her 2 youngest children to the basement and dropped them, Eliza Ann and Holder. So Eliza Ann was 3 and Holder was 6 months, into their cistern in the basement. That's where they drew their water from, where they both drowned. Then she cut her own throat with her husband's straight razor. And according to the news at the time, she had died instantly. So she went in deep and wow. Some believe that she had attempted to also kill Maria, their older daughter, but she was either able to swim or never really got down there or was able to run away. So I think what it comes down to is that because she was the aunt by marriage, you can't say necessarily that it was directly related. But then when we're talking about things like paranormal, we're talking about like strange phenomenon. We're talking about a street, because some have said that the Lizzie Borden house, where there would not have been any children except for when Lizzie and her sister were younger, you would hear children running. Well, obviously these kids were much littler, so maybe the oldest daughter, who knows? But it was something that was brought up in Lizzie Borden's trial of having a history. So 2 significant murders, both happening on the same street within, I guess, about 50 years of each other. Now, that might not seem like much, but they're all within the same general geographic area. So I found that to be very analogous, unfortunately, to the Lindsay Clancy situation. And you just can't help but wonder, are there things in this part of the world? Now, some of you might be hearing it and go, no, it's just mental illness. But I do think, it's just my opinion, that mental illness can sometimes be a gateway for other things, just as addictions can be as well, or even just, being not even necessarily depressed, just being down and susceptible to influences from a different realm, if you will. I always looked at it from the perspective, if you are someone who believes in God, then conversely, you kind of have to believe in these other things as well, as scary and as, untoward as those things are. So last but not least, on this weird little journey that we're going on this evening, it got me thinking about ghost hunters, right? I started the show with that. And I just thought I'd recount this one little journey. And Carlos, I don't know if you're listening, but I believe that you were there on this one particular evening. I may have told this story on the podcast as well. But there was a place in my hometown of Meriden, Connecticut, known as Undercliff State Hospital, which was a 40-acre hospital situated on Undercliff Road in Meriden, Connecticut. Now, it ran from 1910 to 1976, and it was first built as a sanatorium. So for those who don't know what a sanatorium is, it is for people who are living with tuberculosis, German measles, and even at the time, chickenpox and smallpox. All things that are, pre-vaccine and could be potentially fatal and could be spread very easily. Particularly tuberculosis, brutal. Smallpox as well. I think we minimized maybe chickenpox because so many of us were inoculated but still got it. I don't remember the chickenpox vaccine particularly, but nevertheless, and German measles, I know could really take a toll as well. So you'd go to the sanatorium as a place to go ahead and recover. Or with something like tuberculosis, which is very degenerative, you might be checking in for forever. But began taking adult patients there in 1939. And in the 1920s, it was named to Undercliff Sanatorium. So Meriden Sanatorium to Undercliff Sanatorium. And then in 1967, it was changed once again, new brand, Undercliff Mental Health Center. So one of the things to consider about things like sanatoriums and sanitariums is that sanatoriums often became sanitariums because if you were unable to provide for yourself, so it could be mental illness, but it could also be because of disability, right? So you were unable to go ahead and take care of yourself and you didn't have family. You didn't have anyone to take care of you. You couldn't live on your own. You'd become a ward of the state and be sent to a place like Undercliff. But that could be for like anything. Sometimes orphans would be sent there. If like there was no room in an orphanage, go to the sanitarium, right? And as it became more about mental health, you're talking about putting a lot of really innocent people in with potentially very dangerous people. Now, when I don't put it in the way of like innocent and mental health being like interchangeable. You can be innocent and suffering, but you can also be very, very dangerous and not so innocent, suffering from severe mental illness. Makes them dangerous. So you're putting perhaps impressionable, weak people into some challenging situations. So nevertheless, the facility was decommissioned in 1976, with remaining patients being moved to cottages on the property. And in 2004, the state changed the name to Undercliff State Hospital to be more appropriate for patients and residents. Now, there's several new buildings there, all that. But the original building was considered uninhabitable, okay? And somewhere around, I want to say 1992, I think we were still in high school. And someone had the amazing idea to go there. Now, it was around this time of year. And we thought, again, this was something that we wanted to do. So we found a way in, went down through the basement, and oddly enough, we ended up running into another group. And this other group, similar in age to us, but I just remember there was this young black man who was with that other group. And we're all headed in. He's like, I'm not going in there. And everyone's kind of looking at him like, what are you, a pussy? He's like, not going in. Not going in. All of you are crazy. I'm going to stay right here, thanks. Anyone wants to stay out here? You can keep me company. You're all out of your fucking minds. Like, all right, dude, we're going in, right? So that's what we did. So we went in through the basement. And you immediately are just struck by debris everywhere, just everywhere. And I don't remember if like we even had like proper lighting. I don't remember having flashlights. I guess we did, because I do remember there being some lights, but I'm wondering if some of the lights were still functioning. And we just began to make our way room by room. And there'd be like one room that would just have board games and sheet music. But in that lower level, when you're first coming in, literally like gurneys and wheelchairs and, you know, some of them with restraints. And I think what they would do, honestly, for some younger ones is, you know, they would have like a crib turned upside down. Now that might have just been through years and like moving stuff around, or they would just put that over people to keep them contained. I don't know, but we began to just make our way through. So there was a large like rec room. Now I didn't see it myself. It was dark, but there were some things on the wall, which someone told me later on was like a squirrel or something that had been like nailed there. Because of course, teenagers think this is hilarious. Now, killing small animals, whoever did that, you got a problem. Something wrong with you. That's like the first thing in the, you know, future serial killer guidebook is killing small animals, right? And nailing them to walls. I'm not talking about like, you know, I have killed my share of chipmunks. I'll be honest, because they overran my yard. I wasn't like playing with them and nailing them places. Just what's wrong with you? And of course, there were like pentagrams and people like putting up, you know, inverted crosses, like all this kind of stuff, just a ton of graffiti. And I'm sure much of it was just people being stupid. But there was this one moment that you could say, well, that's not supernatural. That's not paranormal, but it is scary. Because on the end of one of the hallways, one of our friends, so there was two of them. There was our friend Frank and our friend Angela. They went off kind of, they were walking on their own because we were all kind of like fanning out, right? All the things you don't do in a horror movie, right? Let's all split up. And there was a dumbwaiter. So as you may or may not know, a dumbwaiter is, you know, a oftentimes would be just a rope that you would pull. And it's like a little mini elevator for food, right? Or supplies that are going between the floors. Some of them were motorized, but a lot of times it was just a pulley system. And it hadn't been in service in a really long time. So there was just a big hole in the ground, basically where the shaft was. And they almost took the corner and went down the shaft. That would have been a bad situation. Very bad situation. So as we're making our way, there was an entrance that I believe some of our friends came in through, completely blocked, could not get back out that way. And again, I'm sure a bunch of people were messing around, but there was just this weird sense. So at the same time, I'm kind of just enjoying the experience. And I came across, or someone came across, this Santa Claus mask, like a plastic mask, like, you know, we had when we were kids, right? A plastic, like eyes cut out Santa Claus. And I'm fascinated by this thing. Somebody found a whole bunch of LPs, like vinyls, records. I'm sure that, you know, those got taken. You know, it's a bunch of stuff from like the like 50s and 60s. And for some reason, I feel like there was an Andy Williams? I think there was an Andy Williams record in there, something like that. Well, anyway, I have this stupid little Santa Claus thing, and we all, you know, make our way back out. You know, my friends who almost fell down the shaft, they were a little freaked out. That young man that I saw when we, you know, first entered, he was like, so what was that like? And there was a lot of, you know, rumbling and different feelings and different experiences that people had, however they perceived it. And I took this stupid little Santa thing and I placed it on the antenna of my friend's car. And it's like still, right? And that thing just starts slowly spinning around and around and around. But it wasn't like the wind blowing, because it was almost like it was just, what do they call it? A centrifuge, right? Just spinning on the thing. And everyone was like, ah! And it was like this comical moment of like, this place is messed up. But yeah, I mean, these kind of explorations, I think, are so interesting. And I know that all of this has kind of gone in various different directions, but, in watching some of these movies where you have people who investigate these things, you do have to wonder how much is created. When I say created, I don't mean like TV content. We know that kind of stuff, I'm sure, is heavily scripted, and they all claim that it's not. And there are some production companies that pride themselves in saying, look, we don't set these things up. All we're doing is setting up camera angles. So we're taking reports from what happens in a particular building, and we're setting up equipment in those areas. And then whatever happens, happens. Yet they're all able to somehow, far more skillfully than I just did this evening, put together some kind of cohesive story about that particular place. And I think we all take with us, what we will into one of these situations. But I do think that people are more sensitive or not sensitive to certain kind of things. I know I've certainly had very strong feelings hit me before something bad happened. Like I can think of one situation where I was assaulted and I knew something was coming. It's kind of a long story and I won't get into it, but let's just say I was in a private place where people did not know where I was and somehow found me there and I was attacked. And I just had this feeling for 20, 30 minutes. I just couldn't shake it that something was wrong. Sure enough, something happened. So these all kind of things are just, they're so interesting. And I would love to do more actual paranormal content. So if any of you who are listening to this know anyone who does ghost hunts and those kind of things, please send them my way. There was a group out of Massachusetts, but I don't think that they're still running because I haven't been able to make contact with them, because they were, one group that I was like, hey, are you doing anything for Halloween? I imagine that you are. I'd love to either have you on the show or go with you on one of these kind of, hunts, if you will. It's cool stuff. So if you'd be interested in that kind of content in the future or have anyone with this expertise, please let me know. I'd be super stoked because I do think this is really fascinating. And I do think it's kind of like I said, it's kind of a Gen X thing, this whole ghost hunting thing. I mean, beyond like the Warrens from the 70s, 70s and 80s. I mean, a lot of that I think has been driven by, those guys, Jason and I want to say there's Justin and Jason, but that's like two on the nose, but those ghost hunter guys. So Taps, I think also out of Massachusetts or Rhode Island, I think those guys are. Let me know. It's really cool stuff. How do you let me know? You can email me at stuckinthemiddlepod@yahoo.com. You can find me on Instagram, X, and YouTube at StuckPodX. Please like, comment, share, leave 5-star reviews, and most importantly, please subscribe to the podcast. So until next time, later, slackers.